What happens when humans and bears cross paths in the wild? Most of the time, bears avoid people, but sometimes a single mistake can turn a peaceful moment into a nightmare. Whether deep in the wilderness or close to home, these powerful predators can attack without warning. Some victims never saw the danger coming, while others made choices that sealed their fate. From campers to hikers, no one is truly safe when a bear feels threatened or hungry. These real-life stories reveal just how quickly nature can turn deadly. On February 11th, 2025, 9 campers from Moscow traveled to the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia for a winter camping trip. The group consisted of experienced outdoor enthusiasts and a few first-time campers who wanted to explore the frozen wilderness. They had prepared for extreme weather, packing heavy clothing, food supplies, and survival gear. The journey to the campsite took them deep into the snow-covered forest, surrounded by towering trees and icy rivers. The group was excited to experience the remote beauty of Kamchatka, known for its volcanic landscape and diverse wildlife, including wolves and bears. After a long day of trekking through the thick snow, they finally reached a clearing near a frozen river. They decided to set up their tents under a large tree, thinking the dense branches would provide extra shelter from the cold wind. The snowfall had been heavy that day, covering the ground and tree branches with a thick layer of white. Unaware of the potential danger, they finished setting up camp, built a fire, and spent the evening talking and enjoying the warmth of their tents. As night fell, the temperature dropped even lower, and the wind howled through the trees. The campers settled into their sleeping bags, exhausted from the day's hike. The only sounds were the occasional crackling of the fire and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. The calm, however, would not last long. Sometime in the middle of the night, a loud cracking sound echoed through the forest. The weight of the heavy snow had become too much for one of the thick branches above their tent. The massive branch snapped and came crashing down onto one of the tents, trapping and injuring the campers inside. The sudden noise and impact startled the entire group, jolting them awake in a panic. The unexpected disturbance attracted the attention of a nearby Russian grizzly bear. The region was home to these massive predators, which were known to scavenge for food during the harsh winter months. The bear, thinking the noise had come from an animal, moved toward the camp, its heavy paws crunching through the snow. The campers, confused and frightened, tried to assess the situation. Some scrambled out of their tents, while others stayed frozen in place. The fire had started to die down, casting eerie shadows across the campsite. Before anyone could react, the grizzly burst into the clearing. Its powerful frame was covered in thick fur, and its breath was visible in the freezing air. In a sudden, violent motion, the bear lunged at the nearest person. With a swipe of its massive claws, it tore through the fabric of a tent, dragging one camper out into the snow. Chaos erupted as the rest of the group realized what was happening. Some tried to run, while others yelled in desperation, hoping to scare the predator away. But the bear was relentless, driven by instinct and the scent of fear. The dark forest echoed with the sounds of terror as the attack continued. The massive grizzly moved with terrifying speed through the snow-covered campsite. The injured camper struggled to break free, but the bear's strength was too great. The animal sank its teeth into the victim's shoulder, crushing bone and flesh before dragging the lifeless body deeper into the forest. The other campers, now fully aware of the deadly threat, tried to escape, but the heavy snow slowed their movements. The predator continued its rampage, turning its attention to those still inside the tents. One camper, unable to move in time, was mauled as the bear tore through the fabric, its powerful jaws clamping down with devastating force. Others attempted to flee in different directions, hoping to outrun the danger. Some managed to reach the trees, but for those left behind, there was no chance to react. The cold night air was filled with the sounds of struggle and pain. The bear attacked with relentless aggression, swiping its claws and knocking down several campers before delivering fatal bites. The deep snow turned red as the attack continued. The group, once filled with excitement for their winter adventure, was now fighting for survival against an unstoppable force. Amid the chaos, 2 of the campers managed to escape into the darkness. Their breath was heavy, and their hands trembled from both fear and the freezing air. They pressed their bodies against the thick tree trunks, hoping to remain unseen. The sounds of destruction behind them grew quieter as the predator focused on the remaining victims. They knew they could do nothing to help their friends now. Their only hope was to survive until morning. Hours passed in complete silence. The cold became unbearable, but the survivors dared not move. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, they carefully stepped out from their hiding place. Their legs were weak, and every step felt heavier than the last. They cautiously approached what was left of their campsite. The scene before them was horrifying. Tents were torn apart, supplies were scattered, and the snow was stained with the aftermath of the brutal attack. The bear was gone, leaving behind only destruction. Shaken and exhausted, the two survivors knew they had to find help. They made their way through the dense forest, walking for hours until they reached a remote ranger station. The authorities were immediately alerted, and a search team was dispatched to the site. When officials arrived, they confirmed the worst. 7 campers had lost their lives in the attack, their bodies left in the snow as evidence of the nightmare that had unfolded. The news of the deadly incident spread quickly, shocking the nation. Experts examined the situation, stating that the heavy snowfall and the fallen tree had unknowingly lured the bear to the campsite. Wildlife officials tracked the predator and took action to prevent further danger. The tragedy led to stronger safety measures for those venturing into the wilderness. The loss of life served as a harsh reminder of the unpredictable nature of the wild. In July 2023, Carl Hodges, a 45-year-old outdoor enthusiast, set up camp deep in Montana's backcountry. He had always been fascinated by wildlife and spent much of his time exploring nature, documenting his experiences on social media. Originally from Colorado, he had traveled across many parks, believing that humans and wild animals could live together peacefully. His latest adventure was meant to prove this theory. Carl chose a remote clearing near a dense forest, surrounded by towering pines and a small creek running nearby. The spot was peaceful, with birds chirping and the sound of water flowing over smooth rocks. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, he carefully prepared his campsite. He had packed a variety of food, including hamburgers, marshmallows, and other treats, knowing they would attract animals. His plan was simple: leave food out and record what happened. He positioned his camera on a tripod, making sure the view was perfect. He sat near the fire, eating his meal and speaking to the camera about how bears were misunderstood creatures. The air was filled with the scent of grilled meat and melted sugar. As darkness settled over the forest, he felt confident that his plan would work. He had read stories about people encountering bears, and he believed that staying calm was the key to avoiding danger. Hours passed, and Carl waited patiently. Then, just as he was about to give up, a shadow moved at the edge of the trees. A large grizzly bear had caught the scent of the food and was making its way toward the campsite. Its powerful body moved silently through the undergrowth, its nose twitching as it picked up the strongest scents. Carl's heart raced, but he remained seated, trying to appear relaxed. The bear stopped a few feet away, studying the scene before stepping closer. Its dark eyes locked onto the food, and Carl whispered to his camera about the amazing moment unfolding. The grizzly sniffed the air and moved toward the scattered food, pausing only briefly before lowering its massive head to eat. Carl, convinced that the bear posed no threat, slowly raised his hand as if greeting the animal. Without warning, the bear lunged forward, swinging its powerful paw. Its sharp claws struck Carl's face, sending him tumbling backward. Blood splattered across the ground as he collapsed unconscious. The sudden movement startled the bear for a moment, but then it turned its attention back to the food. The fire flickered, casting shadows across the scene. The bear chewed noisily, tearing into the meal that had lured it to the campsite. The camera continued recording as the minutes passed. Carl lay motionless, his injuries severe. The grizzly, now comfortable in its surroundings, moved closer to him, sniffing his body. What happened next would remain unseen until the footage was later recovered. The wilderness was silent except for the sound of the bear feeding. The fire crackled softly, and the camera's red light continued blinking in the darkness. The bear remained near the campsite, chewing through the leftover food. The smell of cooked meat still lingered in the air, keeping the animal interested. The flames from the fire had started to die down, casting flickering shadows around the area. The camera, still positioned on the tripod, continued recording everything. The wilderness remained quiet except for the occasional rustling of leaves and the soft crackling of embers. The grizzly turned its attention back to Carl. He was still lying motionless on the ground, his face covered in blood from the deep wound on his head. The bear sniffed his body before nudging him with its powerful snout. There was no reaction. Satisfied that there was no threat, the animal moved closer. Its sharp teeth sank into his flesh, tearing away pieces as it fed. The sound of ripping echoed through the empty campsite. The bear continued, undisturbed by the surrounding darkness. Time passed, and the night grew colder. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the branches above. The forest remained still, as if watching the scene unfold. Hours later, as the first light of morning stretched across the sky, the bear finally wandered away, disappearing into the trees. The campsite was now in ruins, with scattered belongings and torn fabric from the tent spread across the ground. The only movement came from the flickering red light on the camera. Days later, a search team arrived after Carl had failed to respond to messages from friends. His absence had raised concern, and park authorities were contacted. The team moved carefully through the forest, following a faint trail that led them to the clearing. As they approached the site, the strong smell of decay filled the air. They stepped cautiously over broken branches and scattered supplies before stopping near the remains. Carl's body was partially eaten, his injuries severe and beyond recognition. His belongings were scattered around him, and the camera still stood on its tripod. One of the search team members noticed the blinking light and carefully retrieved the device. The scene was grim, and the team knew there was nothing more they could do. The authorities were informed, and arrangements were made to remove what remained of Carl. Back in town, investigators reviewed the footage from the camera. The last recorded moments showed Carl seated near the fire, his voice calm as the bear approached. The team watched as he raised his hand slightly before the sudden attack. The final moments captured the grizzly sniffing the lens before dragging Carl out of frame. The screen then turned black. News of the attack spread quickly, serving as a warning to those who underestimated the dangers of the wild. Experts reminded visitors of the risks of interacting with large predators. Park rangers placed new warnings around the area, urging people to store food properly and avoid direct encounters with bears. Carl's story became a tragic reminder of how unpredictable nature could be. His final footage remained as proof of the consequences of ignoring safety in the wilderness. In August 2024, 33-year-old Sean Miller arrived on Kodiak Island, Alaska, ready to enjoy a solo camping trip in one of the most remote and wild places in the United States. He had always been drawn to the outdoors, spending much of his free time hiking, fishing, and exploring nature. Growing up in Montana, he had developed a deep love for the wilderness, and this trip was something he had planned for months. He had read about Kodiak Island's breathtaking landscapes and abundant wildlife, especially the massive Kodiak bears that roamed the area. Sean's campsite was located near a river, a perfect spot for fishing. The water was rich with salmon, making it a prime location for both anglers and wildlife. He spent the day catching fish and enjoying the peacefulness of nature. By evening, he had cleaned and prepared his catch, setting up his cooking station just a few feet from his tent. This was his mistake. He failed to realize that the strong scent of fish could attract predators. As night fell, the air became colder, and the sounds of the wilderness filled the area. Sean sat by his campfire, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. A large Kodiak bear, drawn by the scent of the fish, had been moving closer, its powerful nose leading it straight to his camp. It had been searching for food, and the smell was too strong to ignore. The massive bear, towering over most animals in the region, approached cautiously, staying hidden within the darkness of the trees. Inside the tent, Sean had settled into his sleeping bag. The only sounds were the distant rush of the river and the occasional rustling of leaves. Then, a faint noise came from outside. Something was moving near his camp. Sean assumed it was a small animal searching for scraps, a common occurrence in the wild. He unzipped his tent and stepped outside, holding a flashlight in his hand. As he scanned the area, he spotted movement near the trees. Before he could react, the bear charged. Its powerful legs propelled it forward with terrifying speed. Sean panicked and tried to run, but his foot slipped on the uneven ground. He fell onto a pile of sharp rocks, injuring his leg. Pain shot through him, making it difficult to move. The bear was now only a few feet away, It saw Sean as a threat in its territory. In a matter of seconds, the massive animal reached him. Its sharp claws slashed across his body, knocking him to the ground. He cried out in pain, his voice echoing through the night. The nearby campers rushed toward the scene, their flashlights flickering through the darkness. The sound of their hurried footsteps broke the stillness of the night. As they reached the area, they saw the remains of the struggle. Sean lay motionless on the cold ground, his body covered in deep wounds. The bear had disappeared into the forest, leaving behind only traces of its presence. Blood stained the dirt, and torn pieces of clothing were scattered nearby. The campers immediately tried to help, but it was already too late. One of the campers ran back to his tent to grab a satellite phone. Due to the remote location, there was no cell service, making it difficult to call for emergency assistance. The campers did what they could, covering Sean with a blanket and trying to stop the bleeding. They shouted into the night, hoping someone nearby could offer medical aid. The minutes felt long as they waited for any sign of help. Hours later, rescue teams finally arrived after receiving an emergency call from a ranger station miles away. A helicopter was sent to the location, landing near the campsite. The responders assessed the situation and confirmed the tragic outcome. Sean had succumbed to his injuries before help could reach him. His body was carefully placed on a stretcher and airlifted out of the area. The campers who had witnessed the aftermath stood in silence, still in shock over what had happened. Authorities launched an immediate search for the bear responsible for the attack. Local wildlife officials set up tracking teams to locate the animal, fearing it might pose a threat to others. Footprints in the dirt and signs of disturbed vegetation led them deeper into the forest. After several hours of searching, they spotted the massive Kodiak bear. The animal showed no fear of humans, which raised concerns among the experts. Since it had already attacked once, officials made the decision to remove it from the area. The bear was later euthanized to prevent any future attacks. News of the incident spread quickly, reaching people far beyond Kodiak Island. Wildlife experts used the tragedy to educate the public about safety measures in bear territory. They emphasized the importance of proper food storage and keeping campsites clean to avoid attracting dangerous animals. Local authorities reminded visitors to follow strict guidelines when exploring remote locations. Sean's family was informed about the incident, and they struggled to come to terms with the loss. Friends and relatives shared memories of him, recalling his passion for the outdoors and love for adventure. A memorial was planned in his hometown to honor his life. The attack left a lasting impact on those who had been at the campsite that night. Many of them chose not to return to the area, haunted by the memory of what had happened. The wilderness remained as it always had, vast and unpredictable. The tragic event served as a reminder of the risks that came with venturing into nature, where survival often depended on understanding the dangers that lurked in the wild. In June 2023, the Carter family lived in a quiet rural town in Alaska, surrounded by dense forests and towering mountains. Their home was far from the city, offering a peaceful life in the wilderness. John and Sarah Carter had chosen this place to raise their children, wanting them to grow up close to nature. Their 9-year-old daughter, Lily, loved the outdoors. She spent her days exploring the woods, playing near the house, and watching the animals that often wandered close to their yard. Lily was an adventurous and curious child. She enjoyed collecting wildflowers, skipping stones in the nearby creek, and climbing trees with her older brother. The family knew that living in such a remote area came with risks, so they always reminded their children to be careful. They warned them about wild animals, especially bears, which were often seen nearby. That evening, as the sun slowly set behind the hills, Lily played outside. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with shades of orange and purple. She laughed as she ran across the yard chasing fireflies. Her parents were inside finishing up dinner. They occasionally glanced out the window to check on her. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Without warning, the peaceful moment turned into a nightmare. A grizzly bear, large and powerful, had been lurking in the shadows of the forest, drawn by the scent of food or simply wandering in search of prey. It had come too close. The bear moved silently, its massive paws making no sound on the grass. Lily, unaware of the danger, continued playing near the edge of the yard. Then, in an instant, the bear lunged. It grabbed her with its powerful jaws and dragged her toward the woods. The attack was swift, leaving no time for her to scream. A few moments later, Her parents noticed that the yard was too quiet. They looked outside and saw nothing but an abandoned toy lying on the ground. Panic set in. Sarah ran out first, calling Lily's name. John followed, his heart pounding. As they searched, their worst fear became real. Bloodstains and torn pieces of fabric were found near the trees, along with signs of a struggle. The ground was disturbed, as if something heavy had been pulled through the dirt. John shouted for help, and neighbors soon arrived with flashlights and hunting rifles. Everyone knew that in the wild, time was critical. If a bear had taken Lily, she was in grave danger. The group quickly gathered and followed the tracks leading into the deep forest. Nightfall made the search difficult, but they refused to stop. The community worked together, hoping to find Lily before it was too late. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. The once quiet town was now filled with fear, as the people who knew and loved Lily desperately searched for any sign of her. The search party moved deeper into the forest, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The thick trees and uneven ground made it difficult to move quickly, but no one wanted to give up. The footprints of the bear and drag marks on the dirt gave them a path to follow. Every step forward brought a new wave of fear. The sounds of the night, once familiar and peaceful, now felt haunting. As they walked, the group split into smaller teams, covering different directions. Some carried hunting rifles, knowing that the bear was still out there. Others called out Lily's name, hoping for a response. Hours passed with no sign of her. The deeper they went, the stronger the scent of the forest became. The wind rustled the trees and the distant sounds of wildlife filled the air. Then, one of the searchers raised a hand, signaling the others to stop. A few feet ahead, they found more evidence. Shreds of clothing were caught on low-hanging branches, and the ground was covered in disturbed leaves and broken twigs. Their worst fears seemed to be coming true. They pressed on, their determination growing stronger despite the exhaustion. Not long after, they found a clearing where the tracks ended. Scattered remains confirmed what they had dreaded all along. Hunters found parts of Lily's body near a fallen tree, the ground around it stained with blood. The bear was no longer there, having likely retreated after finishing its meal. The sight sent waves of sorrow through the group. Some turned away, unable to look. Others stood frozen, struggling to accept the harsh truth. The news reached the town quickly. The once quiet community was now filled with grief. The Carter family, devastated and heartbroken, held on to each other for strength. The loss of a child was something no parent should ever have to face. Friends and neighbors gathered at their home, offering support in any way they could. Authorities acted swiftly. Experienced hunters and wildlife officials were called to track down the bear responsible. Days later, they spotted it near another part of the forest. The bear showed no fear of humans, which made it even more dangerous. The hunters took action and euthanized the bear, ensuring that it could not harm anyone else. The tragedy left a lasting impact on the town. People became more cautious, keeping their children closer and reinforcing their homes against wildlife. Experts visited the area to educate residents about bear safety, hoping to prevent another incident. The community placed warning signs in the forests, reminding visitors of the dangers of living near wild animals. A memorial was held for Lily, where friends and family gathered to remember her. They shared stories of her laughter, her love for nature, and the joy she brought to their lives. Though she was gone, her memory remained in the hearts of those who knew her. The small town in Alaska would never forget the day they lost one of their own. In July 2024, Emily Harris, a 40-year-old resident of Asheville, North Carolina, started her morning like any other. She lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood near the Blue Ridge Mountains, an area surrounded by forests and rolling hills. Emily had always loved nature and enjoyed the peaceful environment of her town. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, spending most of her time indoors. Walking her dog, a loyal golden retriever named Max, was her favorite way to relax. That morning, the air was warm, and the sun was just beginning to rise. Birds chirped in the trees, and the streets were empty except for a few early risers. Emily had taken this route many times before, passing by the familiar houses and well-maintained gardens. The neighborhood bordered a wooded area where wild animals were sometimes spotted. Deer, raccoons, and even the occasional bear had been seen, but they usually stayed away from humans. As she walked, Emily let Max explore the grass along the sidewalk. He sniffed around, his tail wagging happily. Suddenly, he stopped. His ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Emily followed his gaze toward the dense trees lining the path. Before she could react, a black bear emerged from the underbrush. The bear looked young, possibly searching for food. It had likely wandered too close to the neighborhood and was startled by Max's barking. For a brief moment, Emily and the bear locked eyes. Fear shot through her body, but she knew she had to stay calm. Max barked louder, pulling at his leash, trying to protect her. The bear, seemingly confused and alarmed, made a sudden move. In its panic, it charged forward, knocking Emily off balance. She fell to the ground, her arms scraping against the pavement. The bear, swiping in an attempt to move past her, left a deep scratch on her arm before bolting back into the woods. Pain shot through Emily's arm as she struggled to get up. Max stood beside her, his protective stance unshaken. The bear was gone, but the attack had left her shaken. She took deep breaths, trying to steady herself. The morning, which had started so peacefully, had turned into a terrifying experience. With Max by her side, she forced herself to her feet. Her arm throbbed, blood dripping from the deep wound. She clutched it with her other hand, realizing she needed medical attention. She hurried back to her house, her heart still pounding. The neighborhood remained quiet, unaware of what had just happened. Emily reached her doorstep, breathing heavily as she opened the door. The safety of her home had never felt more comforting. She grabbed her phone and called for help. The reality of the attack settling in. The peaceful streets of Asheville had just witnessed a rare and frightening encounter. The bear had vanished, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would stay with Emily forever. Emily sat on her couch, pressing a clean towel against her injured arm. The pain was sharp, but she was more shaken by what had happened. Her heart was still beating fast, and Max sat beside her, watching her closely. The peaceful neighborhood she had always felt safe in now felt different. The bear had come too close, and the thought of what could have happened made her uneasy. Soon, emergency responders arrived. They carefully cleaned and treated the deep scratch on her arm. The wound was not life-threatening, but it would take time to heal. They advised her to monitor it for any signs of infection and reminded her to report the incident to local wildlife officials. Bears were common in the area, but attacks were rare. Authorities needed to know about any encounters to keep people safe. Later that day, Emily contacted wildlife officials, explaining everything that had happened. They took her report seriously and assured her they would investigate. Black bears were usually not aggressive unless provoked, but sudden encounters could be dangerous. The bear that had attacked Emily was likely young and inexperienced. It had panicked when surprised by the barking dog. Officials explained that during summer, bears wandered into suburban areas searching for food. People were often unaware that simple things like garbage or pet food could attract them. News of the attack spread quickly through the neighborhood. Emily's neighbors were shocked that something like this had happened so close to their homes. Many had seen bears from a distance, but had never imagined one would come this near. Some people became fearful, worried that another bear might appear, while others took the incident as a reminder to be more careful when walking near wooded areas. Wildlife experts visited the area the next day, looking for any signs of the bear. They checked the woods near the neighborhood, but found no sign of it. They believed it had moved deeper into the forest. To prevent future encounters, they placed warning signs around the area and advised residents to remove anything that might attract bears, such as bird feeders and unsecured trash bins. Emily tried to return to her normal routine, but the memory of the attack stayed with her. She became more cautious when taking Max for walks, avoiding areas near the trees and always carrying a whistle, as experts had suggested. Though she still loved nature, she now saw it with a new awareness. Over time, the neighborhood adjusted. People remained alert but did not let fear control them. Wildlife officials continued monitoring the area, reminding residents of the importance of coexisting safely with nature. The bear was never seen again, but its sudden appearance had left a lasting impact. Emily healed, both physically and mentally, but she never forgot that morning. The quiet streets of Asheville had witnessed a rare moment of danger, a reminder that even the most peaceful places could hold unexpected risks. In February 2025, the Montana wilderness was covered in thick snow, making travel dangerous. Officers Adam Reynolds and Chris Walker of the Montana Highway Patrol had years of experience dealing with emergencies in harsh conditions. They had seen many accidents caused by icy roads, but neither expected the threat they would face that day. Adam Reynolds, 38 years old, had served in law enforcement for over a decade. He was known for his calm nature and quick thinking. Having grown up in Montana, he understood the dangers of wild animals. Chris Walker, 35, had joined the force 5 years earlier. He was strong, dedicated, and determined to protect the people of his state. The two officers had worked together for years, forming a strong bond. That afternoon, A truck driver reported a large grizzly bear near a snow-covered highway just outside the wilderness in the Rocky Mountains. The driver had nearly hit the animal and said it looked aggressive and confused. Wildlife sightings were common in this area, but a bear so close to the road was dangerous. The officers were sent to check the situation. As they drove along the deserted highway, the air was freezing and visibility was low due to snowfall. They spotted large paw prints in the snow leading toward a roadside ditch. Stopping the patrol car, they stepped out cautiously, scanning the area. The deep snow made it difficult to move quickly. The officers expected to find the bear in the distance, but everything was silent. Without warning, the bear exploded from the ditch. It had been lying low, hidden by the snow. Its massive body surged forward with terrifying speed. Before Reynolds could react, the grizzly knocked him to the ground. The bear mauled him viciously, his screams cut short. Blood stained the snow as the attack continued. Walker reached for his weapon, pulling it from his holster. His hands shook as he fired. The gunshots echoed through the cold air, but the bullets did little to stop the charging bear. It turned its attention to Walker, who tried to retreat. The thick snow slowed him down, and he lost his footing. The grizzly reached him before he could escape, dragging him into the trees and disappearing into the dark wilderness. Silence fell over the highway once more. The snowfall quickly began to cover the bloodstains on the ground. The officer's patrol car sat with its lights flashing, the radio crackling with unanswered calls. Backup arrived soon after, but it was too late. The only signs of the officers were torn uniforms and blood trails leading into the trees. Wildlife authorities were called in to track the bear. It had proven to be a serious threat and had to be dealt with immediately. As night fell over the Montana wilderness, the search for the grizzly began. The officers had responded to a routine call, unaware that it would become one of the deadliest bear attacks in the region. The cold night settled over the Montana wilderness as search teams prepared for the difficult task ahead. The officers had vanished into the dense forest, and the only clues left behind were scattered patches of blood and torn clothing. Wildlife experts and law enforcement worked together, determined to find the grizzly before it could harm anyone else. Tracking the bear in deep snow was challenging. The animal had left a trail leading deeper into the trees, its powerful body moving effortlessly through the frozen landscape. The team followed carefully, their weapons ready. Hours passed before they spotted the bear resting near a rocky outcrop. The moment it sensed movement, it rose to its full height, letting out a deep growl. The men knew they had no choice but to act quickly. The first shot rang out, hitting the bear in the shoulder. It roared in pain but did not retreat. The second shot struck its chest, and the massive creature staggered before collapsing onto the snow. The grizzly that had claimed 2 lives had been stopped. When the search team examined the remains, they found evidence confirming that the bear had consumed parts of the officers. Back at the highway, news of the attack spread quickly. Fellow officers arrived at the scene, their faces filled with grief. Losing 2 of their own in such a violent way was devastating. Adam Reynolds and Chris Walker had been more than just colleagues. They had been friends, fathers, and sons. Their empty patrol car stood as a reminder of the tragedy. The community mourned the loss. Candlelight vigils were held in their honor, and people gathered to support their families. The pain of their absence was deep, especially for those who had worked alongside them for years. Schools, businesses, and government offices lowered flags in their memory. The sacrifice they had made would not be forgotten. Wildlife experts used the incident to raise awareness about the dangers of bear encounters. They explained that grizzlies often became aggressive when disoriented, especially in harsh winter conditions. People were urged to report sightings immediately and avoid areas where bears had been spotted. Officials increased patrols along remote highways, hoping to prevent another tragedy. Months later, a memorial was placed near the site of the attack. A plaque with their names reminded travelers of their bravery. Visitors often stopped to pay their respects, leaving flowers and notes. The highway, once just a road through the wilderness, had become a place of remembrance. The loss of the officers left a lasting impact on Montana. Their dedication to protecting others had cost them their lives, but their memory lived on. Their families, friends, and fellow officers carried their legacy forward, ensuring they would always be remembered.